What up with it, good people? Welcome to this newest edition of IG5OI. I appreciate you joining me here. Last week, we talked a little bit about some of the higher profile free agency targets out there on the market that the Chargers could potentially go after. Some are still available, others not so much. Maybe one was kind of sort of a pipe dream. We'll touch on that in a bit. But this time around, I want to talk about the direction I would like to see the Chargers go in free agency. And there are some names that I'm sure you guys will feel, maybe some you're not so hot on, but I just think there's an approach the Chargers need to take that I think they will, just based on Joe Ortiz's history with the Baltimore Ravens and also some of the things we've heard him say here going on at the Combine. So without further ado, let's get into the proceedings this evening and chop it all up, shall we? Y'all know who I be, Mr. TOP_FLYT3. And again, welcome to this newest edition of IG5OI. That's right, I got 5 on it. So let's get into it. If nothing else, y'all know I will always keep it a bean with you. And in order to keep it a buck, I got to be honest. Shout out to my man Fly for that one. But that's the motto. And straight up, let's be realistic. The Chargers are not one free agency signing or one home run draft pick away from competing for a Lombardi. They have 26 internal free agents that they have to make decisions on. And the truth of the matter here is not all those guys are actually going to return, nor do I think the Chargers want to bring back every single one, regardless of what Joe Ortiz says. A lot of that is like Coach GM speak stuff. It sounds good, but they have their eyes on certain guys, and you'll see that develop here over the coming weeks. But there may be a few of them that they want to bring back that don't return, and that's based off of the opportunity to have more playing time elsewhere or maybe collect a bigger bag. So be prepared for that. And if you want to look at it from the let's compare it to building a house, right? So last year, Harbaugh and Ortiz essentially had to lift up the house and replace the foundation. They did a fantastic job. This season, he and Ortiz have the money and opportunity to both continue their renovation, but also start buying some high-end functional appliances to outfit the crib with. So it should be a lot more fun this season. And just basing off of what they did last year, with limited resources and the outcome that produced, I expect them to, like I said before, take a bigger step forward. One thing that I noticed, and y'all know I was a huge Joe Ortiz guy in the offseason last year. He was my number one on the GM list as far as guys the Chargers should sign. I have a similar method of team building, I think, to what his idea is, and that, which I think should be the basis for most teams, is you don't want to go into the draft desperate in the first round, and you also don't want to try to build your team through free agency. Free agency should be used to supplement your team, should I say, and the draft is where you build it out. With that being said, I would like to see the Chargers bring in some guys through free agency that can be more bridge players that you can stick around for maybe 1 or 2 years and transition into your younger guys that you bring in through the draft. As far as team needs go, I guess that's a good place to start, right? Because we all know what they are, and they're pretty obvious. Interior offensive line is as good a place to start as any because it's got to be done. It's strange, though, right? Where the Chargers have the most question marks currently is the area of the team that Jim Harbaugh kind of prides himself on the most. So you have to expect that emphasis on getting that fixed is going to take precedent over anything else. It's going to be given priority first and foremost. And I'm not surprised by it whatsoever. I totally expect it, and I'm totally all right with it, to be completely honest with you. So we're talking about on the interior, both guard and center. Now, this particular draft class isn't exactly like brimming with depth at either. And, as of yesterday, the Chiefs announced they're going to franchise Trey Smith. That to me was kind of always like a pie in the sky situation. I didn't want the Chargers to get into a bidding war with teams for a guard because, yes, Trey Smith is an elite player. But again, you have to consider everything else that the team needs. And I don't think you should go spending a ridiculous amount on the interior offensive lineman, regardless as to how good they are, specifically a guard. So my preference when we're talking about options for guard in free agency, I'm looking at Kevin Zeitler, who is 34, 35 years old. So definitely an elder statesman, but still playing high level of ball out there. He did most recently with the Detroit Lions, and you can use him as a 1-year bridge guy. Then there's someone else that I was very, very high on a few seasons ago when he was coming out, Oklahoma State, I believe. He was, I think he went to Oklahoma State, if I'm not mistaken. I'm 40 plus at this point, so the memory does what it wants. Tevin Jenkins, he meets like the physical criteria, but there are some health concerns. Even though this season he played the most amount of games he's played in any year of his career to this point. And like I said before, he's just a bear of an interior offensive lineman. He's going to mash guys. You're going to talk about pancake blocking, dudes getting like just lit up and embarrassed and pretty much road graded. Every snap is what he does. But he just has to be on the field and available. But I think he's worth taking a shot at. But those are going to be probably my top 2 choices at guard. If you had to make me choose between the two, I mean, I believe Jenkins played more left guard. Zeitler's been a right guard. All right, you're going to force me. Give me Zeitler for the experience. And again, the fact that I think he's going to be a 1-year guy that you can get a little bit of a rental out of and look for another option going into next offseason, maybe through the draft when there's a better interior class that's incoming. Or, to be completely honest, depending on what you do with Zion, if you want to bring in some competition, I mean, there's going to be a lot of money on the interior. Well, not necessarily. I mean, Zeitler on a 1-year deal shouldn't cost you a ton. But Jenkins would probably really push Zion. And there was that talk about Zion maybe playing center by Joe Ortiz, and that shouldn't be a shock to anyone either. He took some snaps in the Senior Bowl the year he came out there. There was some offseason work that apparently Joe Ortiz says he's getting for the role right now. For me, it's less about, that's our center of the future, and more about the fact that you're going to have to work to secure a starting spot. It's not guaranteed to you this year. So Zion, man, I mean, I hope it works for you. But really and truly, I think if you surround him with better players on the interior, specifically at center, then, between a capable center and, we already have an all-world left tackle, which Chargers need to extend as well, I think Zion's going to play significantly better. Having a center next to you that can really, really ball makes a world of difference for the entire offensive line in general, but specifically the guys right next to him. So I don't know. We'll see what goes on with Zion, but still, I think there needs to be some competition brought in, whether that be through free agency or via the draft, and I think one of the two will happen. But hey, if they found a way to bring in Zeitler and Jenkins, feels like a little bit of overkill, but does it really? I'd be all right with both. But again, if you're going to have to make me make a choice, give me Zeitler at right guard and let Zion figure it out at left guard and just bring in a capable center, which brings me to my next point. I want the Chargers to go after Drew Dalman. That would be your long-term interior solution at center, as he's only, 26 years old. And as I mentioned before, a capable center is going to help Zion out because it's going to mask some of his deficiencies. Maybe he grows a little bit from playing next to a guy who has a bit more athleticism. Now, listen, I know that he isn't necessarily a scheme fit because he's more of a zone guy as opposed to a gap or power player, but I think he has the chops to do it. He's definitely a very good run blocker, needs to improve in pass protection, but I trust him more than I do a player through the draft because this is a weaker class that you're probably going to have to move from a position that is more natural to them, whether it be guard or tackle, to center. And if we're just talking about pure centers, there aren't very many of them that are very good that will be able to step in day one and make a difference, in my opinion. So that's the route I would go. Moving on, because we could stick on interior offensive line all day, as that was a huge problem last year, but everyone knows that. Let's talk about wide receiver. And for me, it's kind of simple. Once the Jets cut Devontae Adams, do what you got to do to bring him in. Sign him up for 2 years, and here's another beautiful part about this. It won't affect your comp pick prospects. So Joe Ortiz should be elated about that. Just think about everything that Devontae does as being a true X. And people understand it's not necessarily about having a quote unquote number one wide receiver, but Devontae would be that. It's more about having different styles of players who can do more than one thing. And Devontae provides you all of that. I mean, he can get open quickly. So you're talking about more of a West Coast passing game. He provides you the opportunity to do that successfully. He can win at all three levels. And he, even at over 30 years old, had one of his better seasons in his career. And we're talking about between moving from the Raiders over to the Jets, where he missed like 3 or 4 games, still had over 1,000 yards receiving. Dude is just aging like fine wine at the position. So you bring him in and think about all that does for Ladd McConkey, because if you want to say number 1 wide receiver, then Ladd's probably still going to be your target monster and have the most receptions. So by that, metric, yeah, he's your number 1 wide receiver. But overall, it just makes life a lot easier for him, and it makes hell for defenses, because you're going to have to account for 2 top tier, high level wide receiving options that can beat you at multiple levels of the field. Now, if for some reason something crazy happens, like the Rams trade Matthew Stafford to the freaking Raiders, because, apparently that's a thing potentially, or the Giants. I don't know why the hell you want to do that. But then there's talk about Aaron Rodgers maybe going to the Rams, and it feels like Devontae follows Aaron everywhere, but I really cannot see Aaron Rodgers with the Rams. Sean McVay dealing with that type of headache, it just feels like, I don't know. We'll deal with that if it comes time. But yeah, if Devontae, or when Devontae's cut, Chargers got to go make a play for that. Absolutely. I'd also kick the tires on Chris Godwin. I mean, I know that he's also operated out of the slot mostly in Tampa, but he's definitely been utilized on the perimeter as well. This wouldn't necessarily solve the team's need for an X, but there are viable options in the draft well into like the 3rd, maybe even the 4th round. So again, I said before, don't get caught up on the wide receiver 1 tag. Just look for guys who can do multiple things, different body types. But I mean, look, the Chargers need a specific type of wide receiver right now that I think is going to be available to them if they decide to go that route in the draft. And there are some other guys I can talk about here in a bit as far as free agency options go. These just being more so my top 2. But the Bolts need a bigger body, presence on the outside that threatens vertically and can win like in contested catch situations and assist in moving the chains on 3rd down. And they don't currently have that. I'm going to give like an honorable mention here to a couple of guys. Amari Cooper. I think Amari's 30, and he showed up a little bit for the Bills. Now, not to the degree that I think people were hoping. And I know a lot of Chargers fans were looking for him to maybe be added last season. And he seems to be aging quickly. So that one I am a little leery about. I wouldn't hate it if the Chargers brought him on, because it does give you another option at X. And I think he can still ball for a bit and be another one of those bridge guys. There's Darius Slayton that gives you more of a vertical threat. And also Nick Westbrook-Akine, who I'm a bit higher on than most, and I could easily see as a fitness offense because he's just a gritty receiver, someone who's going to go out there and stick his face mask in DB's chest, even linebackers, as a blocker. And I feel like he's more of that Harbaugh style wide receiver, so I would not be surprised to see him end up on this team in some way, shape, or form. And then you have the tight end position, which we all know is an issue, and we need it remedied ASAP. This is the role that I feel like most needs to be filled. Well, one of them needs to be filled in free agency without going into the draft, even though we all know it's still a need regardless. And the only person that really makes sense to me here is Juwan Johnson for a couple reasons. He is a former Oregon teammate of Justin Herbert, so there's that connection. But he's also a sneaky, decent option who I think would actually be effective in this offseason. I mean, he had like 550 yards receiving and 3 TDs with the Saints on the receiving end of passes from the likes of Derek Carr, Spencer Rattler, and the son of Zoolander himself, Jake Hayner. So if you get him with a capable quarterback, I think those numbers would uptick tremendously, and he may end up being somewhat of a free agency steal. Now, this should in no way preclude them from going after their tight end of the future in April. If anything, it just helps solidify it and gives you more options, and you have like possibly 2 tremendous receiving threats there. Now going on to the running back position. I'm bringing back J.K. Dobbins. Point blank period. To me, it's a no-brainer. But if there were ever a year to draft like a back of the future / like running mate for Dobbins, this year's class is basically Baskin and Robbins. Like, pick your flavor. They're all over the place and different styles. You don't necessarily have to get a guy that mimics Dobbins. You can get someone who has similar skill set, but maybe is a bit more explosive, who offers you more in the passing game. Or if you want to double down on a similar type of running back, it's cool too. I do think, honestly, and Greg Roman doesn't use his running backs that often in the passing game, not as much as he should. I would still look to bring in a guy who gives you a little bit more in the passing game, has some more juice to him in the open field as a compliment to JK. So I'm cool with that. I think they're definitely going to nail one in the draft this season, and this off season in April. But JK's still going to come back, and you can't, as much as it sucks to say this, you can't depend on JK getting through a full healthy season. I mean, last year was the most healthy he's been in his career to this point, and he still ended up on IR for a bit due to, a knee sprain. So you just can't count on it. You don't want to put all your eggs in that basket, and we don't know what's going to happen with Gus Edwards. He could potentially be cut, even if he doesn't. His health was an issue last year as well. You just want to build out that backfield and get a nice stable of guys that you can depend on from week to week. So I think they'll attack that, and potentially even earlier than what maybe some people expect, even though there are a plethora of backs to select from. So I don't think the Chargers escape the draft without getting at least one. Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball, and we can go straight to the interior defensive line. I'm bringing back both Poona Ford and Teair Tart, no question. Both performed very well last season, and I mentioned it. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here, but I did post on Twitter at one point that Teair Tart was probably going to step in and make a difference, and I know a lot of people gave me some pushback there, but we saw it. I mean, he was more of a rotational guy, but he might have been the best pass rusher on the inside for the team, and I think he's still developing, and that's someone that I would definitely take a chance on continuing to cultivate. And Poona Ford, man, lightning round favorite from years ago, the tree stump himself, the fire hydrant. We're talking about reinvigorating a career. Poona might have been your defensive MVP if we're not talking Derwin James. He's not going to get a lot of credit for it because statistically, you know how it is. You're doing a lot of the grunt work on the inside. Box score may not be the most appealing thing. It's not going to be aesthetically pleasing, but he ate up a lot of those blocks, which allowed Deion Henley to have his best year. Well, I mean, it's only his second year, but be what should have been a Pro Bowl player this year. I'm sure Deion would definitely want to give him his credit. But Poona he's a disruptor on the interior, and it's something the Chargers have been missing. If you got two of those guys and you can add to that, then magnifique. But 1,000% bringing back both. And as far as external free agents, I kind of went back and forth about Milton Williams because depending on the market, I don't necessarily know if I want to get into a bidding war for an interior pass rusher that hasn't ever played more than like 50% of his snaps in any given season. Add to that, like the depth of the interior offensive line in this class. I'm sort of on the fence again, like I said, with this one, but I'm leaning more towards focusing on the draft there and maybe using those funds elsewhere. From there, the position that I know a lot of people are talking about, but they're not really focusing on it as much as I think they should, and it's the edge. Khalil Mack is a must re-sign for me. I mean, even at 34 years old, he's still a near elite edge setter and definitely still an above average pass rusher. I mean, you need his leadership and also his intangibles, for the defense as a whole, but especially for any additions to the edge room that you bring in via free agency or through the draft. Which leads me to Joey Bosa. And Joey got to go, man. I heard what Joe Ortiz said, and again, GM speak. You're going to say the best things you can about your players. You're not going to throw them under the bus, but let's be serious here. I'm not bringing Joey Bosa back. Number one, having the highest cap hit among all edge rushers in 2025. And with these injuries continuously piling up. I mean, the production isn't there. I give the dude kudos for battling through injury last year and playing, being on the field, being out there, being available. All that's great. But we're talking about a declining player. and you don't get healthier as you get older. Just a fact of life. Just seriously. I'm 41. I'll be 42 in 2 months. My knees feel like that of, you know what, let me not disrespect anybody in their 50s or 60s. I don't know y'all's pain. Let's just say once 40 hit, somebody pressed the button on my knees and now they ain't kneeing the way that they used to knee just like 2-3 years ago. Anywho, that's my problem. But never mind. Joey, we appreciate you being one of, or is he like the last remaining San Diego Charger? All good. But at this point, we ain't bring you back on ceremony and for nostalgic purposes. It's just time. You're going to save over 20 mil by cutting him. And you can add that to the pot and go hunting for additional players. But you absolutely, again, want to attack this position in the draft. I'd like to see them bring in maybe some situational pass rushers, those guys who specialize in that, or maybe like an affordable deal, short term. Let's throw out some names like, and I know some people might frown at this one, Josh Uche, who was most recently with the Chiefs, couldn't see the field, but dude's a former Michigan Wolverine, so that might help him having understanding of the scheme and familiarity there. And like I said before, I'm not bringing him in as an every down player, just someone who can get in a rotation. Or maybe like an Azeez Ojulari, who has had some injury issues, but again, is a freak athlete and somebody you can bring in as a situational edge rusher. Dude who can, if nothing else, get after the quarterback and put some real stress on an offense. Both have a lot to prove. And like I mentioned before, you should be able to grab at least one on a short-term deal. That being said, my money would probably be on Uche. Just looking to reignite his career, and again has familiarity with Jim Harbaugh, so he'd probably want to walk in there and see if he can't earn a bigger contract going into the future. So he'd definitely be motivated. Familiarity with the scheme absolutely helps, and you might get another steal there. Going on to, you know what? I know that I said edge was maybe being a bit understated and not discussed enough, but truly, I think people understand there's no guarantee that Khalil Mack is going to come back. He might test the market, probably will. And I don't think that the Chargers in any way, shape, or form should keep Joey Bosa, regardless of what happens, whether or not Mack walks. I don't think they should try to extend him to lower that cap hit, or pay him. Absolutely not the $36 million he's on the books for next year. It's time to move on from that. But I get people get a general idea that, you know, things could get a little shaky there. Cornerback might actually be the position that I don't think is being discussed enough. And truth be told, as far as external free agents go, I'm a DJ Reed guy. And I get that he's only 5'9", but dude plays bigger. And he's really good in both coverage as well as a perimeter run defender. I mean, you can also use him interchangeably with Tarheeb Still, both on the outside and in the slot. And let's be honest, as enticing as the prospects are for Cam Hart being like the long-term boundary corner, those concussions are scary, and you have to take that into consideration. So yeah, corner, I'd see them potentially trying to attack it with the vet and free agency, but then also getting maybe a mid-round younger guy to bring in and develop. And if last season was any indication, they're good on hitting there. So, you know, pull another 5th-round rabbit out of the hat. Go for it. So that pretty much covers all the positions that, off the top of my head, are things that I want, or areas I want to see the Chargers attacking free agency and guys that I want them to go after. Here, also, some names to monitor that have popped up here in the offseason, that have some of them connections with the Chargers previously and just in the last few weeks, because these are dudes who will either be cut or potentially traded. Now, especially if we're talking cuts here, the Chargers need to get busy on a few of these names. Number one, I already mentioned it, Devontae Adams, who almost certainly will be cut from the Jets. There was that DK Metcalf talk that popped up a few weeks ago. That will happen via trade if it were to happen. To me, it all depends on what the asking price is there. Would I give up a second for DK? Good question. Maybe. Definitely a third. But I don't know about the second. I'm a little leery there. I know what he would bring to the offense as far as a vertical threat, but he's not necessarily all that great a contested catch guy. So he gives you something in one aspect of the game that you don't really have anywhere else. Definitely a bigger body, more physical dude, but he doesn't necessarily play the way that you would want someone that size to play in the shorter area of the field and also as a chain mover. Another name to be on the lookout for, Greg Newsome, corner for the Browns. Greg Newsome II. His name actually popped up last offseason as a potential target for the Chargers via trade. Didn't work out for some reason, but they could actually be looking to release him or trade him. Don't be shocked if Newsome's name starts circulating around the Chargers again. Another cornerback news, Jair Alexander with the Packers. That one's weird because he'll probably be cut. I know they're talking about him being traded, but I would not be shocked to see him cut. I know he's had some lower body injuries here in the last few seasons, but also part of me feels like that dude just wants out of Green Bay. And I would not be shocked if he, in certain instances, kind of milked a few of those injuries. Now, I'm not here to judge anybody's tolerance for pain or whether or not they can go. I just know that the vibe I got from dude was he wasn't playing a second more or a snap longer than he needed to in a Packer uniform. So if he ends up cut, not shocked. I'm sure they're going to try to get something for him in the trade market, putting him on the block there. But again, another name to keep a lookout for. And lastly, on the interior defensive line, Jonathan Allen, another name that was associated with the Chargers here in the last couple of years that they might have been looking to make an offer for. He's probably going to end up being cut. And then that kind of changes the math on the guys that you're looking to bring back on the interior. Potentially, or you could still bring back your two interior dudes, see what Jonathan Allen would cost you on the free agent market, and still supplement, or you're supplementing for your free agency, but still bring in a young cat in the draft because it's so deep and there's so much talent into like the 4th, 5th round. You could still get a developmental guy there. So those are just some of my ideas, folks. I think overall the Chargers have some really, really good options here in free agency that they can look to add before we get into April and into the draft. And I ain't really doing a ton of mock drafts because so much can change once free agency starts. And then all of that stuff was fun while you did it, but it ends up being for nothing at all. And I ain't a Debbie Downer. I'm not trying to ruin y'all's party. If you want to do 1,001 mock drafts, go for it. I would much rather wait until free agency hits so then you get a more realistic view of what the potential moves could be in April. So I'm going to hold off for a bit. But we've got more stuff coming. I told y'all I was dealing with the flu for a bit. It found its way to Jamie, so he's pushing through it. And G will be back as soon as he can. So, again, I appreciate y'all for joining your boy here. Y'all know who it is, Mr. TOP_FLYT3 if you want to follow me on Twitter, because that's always fun, I guess. But until the next time, I'm gone.